He can't explain it, but he feels it. Something in the atmosphere shifted. There's a distance now that isn't just physical, it's spiritual. You are rising, and the ground beneath him no longer feels familiar. Your energy is no longer reaching for him the way it used to, and that unfamiliar silence terrifies his spirit more than your absence ever could. You're no longer standing in the same space emotionally. And that's not because you're bitter, it's because you've healed. You're not punishing him by pulling away. You're protecting your peace. And he's beginning to realize that your peace doesn't need his presence anymore. What he feels now is not rejection. It's the void left behind by everything he took for granted. He used to think your loyalty was unshakable, that your love would always return like waves to a shore. But now the tide has gone quiet. And in that quiet, he hears his own fear. He once held power in your longing, but now your longing has transformed into alignment. You no longer ache for him to rise. You've simply risen without waiting. And the truth is, he never expected you to outgrow the version of yourself that needed him. He scrolls, listens, watches, and wonders how you've become even more radiant in his absence. What he doesn't realize is this glow was forged in pain, in surrender, in nights you stayed awake choosing yourself over and over again. He doesn't say it out loud, but he feels your energy slipping beyond reach. What was once familiar now feels sacred and untouchable. You're becoming a woman whose peace can't be disrupted, whose spirit no longer responds to confusion disguised as love. And that truth unsettles him, because for the first time he sees that you are no longer orbiting his emotional gravity. You're no longer explaining your value, you're embodying it. And it's that embodiment that's making him feel more lost than ever. You don't rise with anger in your heart. You rise with grace, with quiet clarity, with a knowing that love, if it's meant to stay, will never require you to sacrifice yourself to keep it alive. You rise because it was always your destiny. He just never thought he'd watch it happen without him. He feels it in his chest, that strange pull, the one that once tethered your souls but now only echoes. He tells himself he's fine, but his spirit knows what his mouth won't speak, that the very thing he feared losing is now rising beyond his reach. You used to shrink your light just so he wouldn't feel threatened by your growth. But now you've learned that true love doesn't ask you to become less. It celebrates your expansion. And since he couldn't, you released yourself to bloom without apology. He underestimated your silence, thought it meant waiting, thought it meant pause. What he didn't know is that silence was the sound of you choosing yourself, of you stepping into your calling, of you remembering who you were before anyone made you forget. You are no longer available to be his comfort while he remains unsure. You are no longer willing to carry the emotional weight he refuses to lift. What you carry now is your own peace, your own purpose, and your own power. He watches you shine now, not knowing how to approach, because he senses what's changed. You're not waiting for closure. You're not hoping for a return. You're living, you're building. You're embodying the love you once tried to give him, and that scares him more than anything. Not your distance, but your freedom. Because your freedom means he no longer has a way back. Not to the woman you were, and not to the space you created for him. That version of you no longer exists. But here's what he'll never say. He misses your softness, your loyalty, your patience. He misses the way your energy held space for his becoming. But he realizes now he waited too long, and your spirit no longer revolves around unfinished stories. He'll never admit that seeing you rise shakes something in him, that it makes him question who he is. But it does. Because when someone witnesses what they could have grown beside, and realizes they didn't, Regret takes root in places even silence can't quiet. You've stopped bending to be chosen. You've stopped shrinking to be understood. You walk now with a posture that only comes from surviving what you never deserved. And it shows in your glow, your voice, your peace. He can't name it, but he knows. Knows that something about you is different, that your spirit no longer waits, that the woman he once knew has become something more, something divine, something he's no longer aligned with. And while he wrestles with what was, you are living in what is. You are grounded, centered, aligned. He thought you'd be devastated by his distance, but instead, your elevation became your testimony. Let him feel the weight of what he didn't rise with. Let your growth remind him of the cost of comfort, because you are no longer healing in his shadow. You are thriving in your own light. Now, he wonders if you think about him at all, but what he doesn't realize is that when a woman rises, she no longer measures her worth by who's watching. Your growth is not about him. It's about you finally living as the version of yourself that no longer waits for love to feel whole. He feels it when your name comes up in conversation, and his stomach tightens. He laughs it off, shrugs, pretends you were just a phase. But later, when the room is quiet, he replays everything he never said. Everything he should have said. Everything he said too late. Your rise exposed his stagnation. He thought if he stayed, still time would somehow pause everything else. But while he was resisting change, you became it. While he ran from his calling, you answered yours. And now the distance is not just emotional, it's spiritual. You stopped explaining yourself the day you realized love isn't something that has to be proven to the right soul. It recognizes you immediately. And if it needs constant convincing, it was never truly aligned. That's why you left the door open, but never turned back. He assumed you'd always be there like an open book on his shelf, ready to be read whenever he missed the feeling of being understood. But you're no longer a story he can revisit. You're a closed chapter in a language he never fully learned. The more you rise, the more obvious it becomes that he never really knew you. He knew your giving, your softness, your patience, but he never truly held your power. And now that it's shining, he sees what he couldn't see when you were dimming yourself to be loved. He tries to convince himself that he didn't need you. But that's the thing about spiritual connection. It doesn't fade. It burns quietly. It whispers when the mind is loud. And no matter how many distractions he throws at the silence, your memory always finds a way back in. Your glow is no longer a performance, it's protection. You no longer offer yourself just because someone finally gets it. Now they have to match it. And that shift, that new standard, it changed everything about the way you're seen and by whom. He wanted you to wait, to stay the same, to hold space for him while he delayed his own growth. But something inside you shifted the day you realized staying small to keep someone close is just another form of self-abandonment. And you've abandoned yourself for the last time. He doesn't understand how silence can be so loud, but yours is. It echoes, it teaches. It reminds him that presence isn't about being near. It's about being real. And now, with no more words left to say, he's forced to sit with the reality of all he never became beside you. There was a time you would have taken him back just for showing up. But now you know, just showing up isn't enough. Not for a woman who's done the work, not for a soul who has climbed out of her own ruins just to rebuild herself in truth. He underestimated your silence, misread it as weakness. But now he sees that it was the quiet before the bloom, that your retreat wasn't escape, it was evolution. And evolution doesn't return to places that kept it caged. You aren't hoping he changes anymore. You're hoping he finds peace, because love, when fully healed, doesn't crave revenge. It craves freedom. And the highest form of healing is watching what once wounded you disappear in your rear view without bitterness. He doesn't know how to love a woman who doesn't need him. He only knew how to love from a place of being needed. But your self-sufficiency doesn't make you cold. It makes you clear. And clarity doesn't chase confusion. Now, every time he sees a woman walking in her truth, he thinks of you. Not because he wants to, because his soul does. Because the soul never forgets the one who touched it without needing to possess it. And you? You were unforgettable before he even noticed. He's realizing that closure doesn't come when the story ends. It comes when we finally tell ourselves the truth. And for him, that truth is sinking in slowly. She rose, and I stood still. She moved forward, and I watched. She healed, and I held back. You never asked him to be perfect. Only present. But presence requires courage, and courage requires honesty. And honesty, it requires a man to face what he's been hiding from himself. He wasn't ready, and your growth only made that clearer. Now you're becoming the woman he can no longer access. Not because you're cruel, but because you're called. And your calling no longer includes repeating old lessons for people unwilling to learn the first time. You've moved from survival to sovereignty. He'll never say it out loud, but every version of love he encounters from now on will be compared to you. Not because you were flawless, but because you were whole. And now that you're rising, he finally sees what it means to lose something sacred before understanding its value. And you are not angry. You are not waiting. You are walking. You are building. You are preparing the space for love that doesn't run, for alignment that doesn't confuse, for presence that doesn't pretend. You're not just rising, you're arriving. There are days when he almost calls, not because he has something new to say, but because the weight of not saying anything is finally pressing into his chest. But by the time he gathers the courage, he remembers. The version of you who waited on him no longer lives at that number. You used to hope for the day he'd understand. Now you understand it doesn't matter anymore. Not because he's insignificant, but because your peace no longer depends on being seen by someone who looked at you through the lens of their own wounds. He thought you rising meant forgetting him. What he doesn't know is that you never tried to forget. You simply stopped remembering in ways that hurt. Your love didn't die, it transformed, and he wasn't ready to meet the woman it turned you into. You're not hiding anymore. You used to shrink so he'd feel bigger, soften your voice so he wouldn't feel challenged. But now your softness has strength, your quiet has boundaries, and your presence has weight. It can no longer be carried by someone unsure of what it's worth. He wonders who's beside you now. Who gets the warmth of your laughter, the glow of your attention? But that curiosity isn't rooted in love. It's rooted in loss. Because he sees now what he couldn't feel then. That your love wasn't ordinary. It was divine. And when love is divine, it leaves fingerprints on the soul. He carries them, though he may never say so. In the way he hesitates before trusting someone new. In the way he flinches when a woman holds him with too much grace. Because grace reminds him of what he couldn't keep. He tries to recreate what you gave freely, but it never feels the same. Because he's realizing you can't duplicate connection. You can't manufacture resonance. What you two had wasn't perfect, but it was real. And real is rare. Real doesn't repeat itself for those who stayed unsure. You no longer seek closure. That phase passed the moment you realized you were looking for it in someone who couldn't even offer consistency. Now your peace is your closure. Your breath is your answer. And your life? It's the loudest message you've ever sent without words. He hoped you'd be there if he ever circled back. But when he finally looked up, you weren't circling, you were soaring, and nothing shakes a man more than realizing the woman who once made space for his hesitation has made peace with his absence. Now your name feels heavier in his thoughts, not out of guilt, but gravity. Because some names stay with us, not because of what was lost, but because of what they represented. You were his reminder of what real could have been, and real is hard to forget. You don't miss the relationship. You miss the version of yourself who believed love alone was enough. But even that nostalgia fades because now you know, love is only enough when both souls are willing to rise with it. You rose. He resisted. That's the truth. He tried to keep you in a space of almost ready, almost there, almost open. But you were never created to live in someone's almost. You were made for all in, and your soul finally caught up with that knowing. Every time he sees you shine, a part of him wakes up, and another part mourns. Because the light you walk in came from fires he thought you'd never rise out of. He underestimated your resilience, and now your glow humbles him. You're not angry, you're not vengeful. That would still require emotional access. You've moved beyond emotion. You're in elevation. You're no longer trying to make him. See? You've become too busy seeing yourself. He can feel your life expanding, even from a distance. Because energy never lies. And the energy you carry now, it's grounded, magnetic, sovereign. It speaks without speaking. And it no longer reaches toward confusion. It attracts clarity. He'll try to tell himself it was timing, that you wanted different things. But in truth you wanted connection, presence, depth. He just wasn't ready to give what he kept asking for. And now you're no longer available to carry someone else's delay. There's something sacred about the woman who rebuilds in silence, who chooses not to explain, but to evolve. That's who you are now. Your story doesn't need his understanding to be valid. Your rise doesn't need his applause to be real. He's learning that not all losses are punishments. Some are revelations. And losing you revealed every part of himself he tried to hide. He may never tell you that, but he knows. And that knowing will follow him longer than your footsteps ever did. And you've stopped trying to be remembered. Now you live to be present. You don't cling to being understood. You walk in truth so clearly, those who are aligned will recognize you immediately. And those who don't, they'll simply watch you rise silently. Because nothing terrifies someone more than watching the one they took for granted become everything they once prayed for without them. Thank you for staying until the end. You didn't hear these words by accident. Heaven placed this message on your path because your spirit is awakening, healing, and rising. You are not forgotten. You are not behind. You are exactly where you're meant to be. If this message touched your soul, confirm it in the comments with the phrase, "I can do all things through him who strengthens me." Let this be your declaration of strength, faith, and alignment with everything God still has for you. Subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss the next divine message sent just for you. More prophetic whispers are coming. Stay close, stay ready, stay in the light. The angels are still speaking. And your next message is already on its way.